Welcome to the July edition cooking segment at Urbana Park District's Kitchen. My name is Ann Swanson and I am the director of Hendrick House Farms. This is a really great month to be cooking because all of my favorite ingredients are coming off the farm. Everything here can be found at your local farmer's market right now. We have some red onions, some jalapeno peppers, some beautiful cilantro, and watermelon and a cucumber. So this is a great seasonal recipe that you can make at home. You will need a blender for this recipe. Today we're going to make watermelon gazpacho. I just told you all the ingredients in the watermelon gazpacho. It's a very simple recipe and easy to recreate with these wonderful summer ingredients. So with the watermelon, I took the ends off and halved it, and I took out the insides, kind of scraping away the seeds of the watermelon. So I have some rough chopped watermelon in a bowl and some smaller diced watermelon in a smaller bowl. I de-stemmed my cilantro and I have just the cilantro leaves. The peppers and the onions and the cucumber I'll show you how to cut down and make the gazpacho. So first of all, we're going to set our watermelon aside. We don't quite need this yet. We'll do the blending at the end of the recipe. What's great about this recipe is that everything that goes into the blender, you're also going to make a small side kind of watermelon salsa pico de gallo to go on top to garnish the soup, the cold soup. Now this soup is cold, it is not hot, so this is the perfect recipe for those hot summer months in late July when you still have the watermelons coming off the farm and you're starting to get those wonderful peppers. Okay, so I'm going to take my cucumber, and we're not going to need this whole cucumber. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the ends, and then I'm going to cut it in half to a more manageable size. The skin can be a little bit rubbery, so I'm going to go ahead and peel it just with my knife. You can use a peeler if you have a peeler, and it doesn't have to be exact. But for the most part, I'm going to take off that outer layer of skin, just like so. Now this is an English cucumber, so it's not heavily seeded on the inside. If you're using a cucumber with a lot of seeds, you might want to scrape those seeds out with a spoon because sometimes they can have a weird mouthfeel, especially when you're eating this wonderful gazpacho. So I've got most of the skin off there. I'm going to discard this in a compost bin. Don't forget to save your vegetable scraps for those rescue pigs out there. Jude and Freebie will have a heyday with this. And this is still a little bit too big, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it down again. And I'm going to prop it up. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm going to cut it into small strips because we want a really fine dice on this. This is more like a garnish to the soup than the actual guts of the soup. So once I slice this thinly, I'm going to go back and slice it thinly the other way. And then I'm going to do a very small dice on this. You want these less than 1/4 of an inch, and you can see the very small cuts. Now don't worry if you can't dice it that thin, it'll still taste good, so no worries there. I'm going to go ahead and finish cutting this other cucumber. And see, this cucumber isn't very seedy. So this is really good. We're not going to worry about those seeds or de-seeding this cucumber. So we'll just do another small dice on this side, and that'll be all the cucumber for this recipe. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the other half of the cucumber and we're going to blend it in with the watermelon to make our soup. So this is the dice. I'm almost finished with this. Let me get my blender. While you're making this recipe, think of it like a salsa, like a fruit salsa. Instead of using tomatoes, you're going to be using watermelon. But the same ingredients that go in a salsa are pretty much going in this watermelon salsa. Jalapenos, onions, cilantro. All right. So I'm going to combine my small diced watermelon into my blender. I'm only going to probably put about half of it in. Because because we want to make sure it gets incorporated with all of the other ingredients too. I'm going to take my small diced cucumbers, and put them to the side for right now while I work with the other half of the cucumber. And for this half of the cucumber, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut it to a more manageable size, and then I'm just going to slowly peel off the skin. Sometimes when you eat cucumber skin, it can really be annoying, especially when it gets stuck in between your teeth. So we'll just peel this off. And then I'm going to do a rough chop on this one because this is going to get blended with our other watermelon. And I'm just going to throw it right in the blender. So I'll do the same to this half. Just peel the outer side. These can also, if you don't want to compost these can also make really great snacks for your kids. This is great in lunch bowls, lunch meals, dipped in ranch dip. Really, really tasty. I'm going to rough chop this and put it in. So don't use a whole watermelon in this recipe. A whole watermelon is a lot of melon. So what I did was I took the melon, cut it in half, and I wrapped one half in saran wrap so that we could have watermelon snacks for later. And what we're going to do is we're just going to slice that watermelon right down the middle and serve it on a platter. So make sure you know that there'll be extra watermelon. This is kind of a cool trick I learned working in kitchens. This is how you small dice an onion. I'm going to slice it this way, but I'm not going to go all the way through the back. So I'm going to make really thin slices just like this. I'm not going all the way through, and I'm keeping my hand very level so that way the knife doesn't hit any part of my hand. If any pieces fall off like this, just set it to the side. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do the same thing. Very thin slices, not all the way through the onion. And then when I turn it around one more time, we should have nice small dices, just like this. And now red onion is very, very strong, so I wouldn't use an entire red onion either. I would just use about half the onion. And that half of the onion is going to be used for the salsa, the watermelon salsa, and also for the watermelon puree for the soup. So as soon as I have my small dice, and I'm going to leave the heel of the onion alone because I'm going to rough chop that and add it to my soup. I'm going to take the small dice of the onion and add it to the small dice of my cucumbers. And so you have a pretty mixture that looks like this. And then I'm going to take the rest of that red onion, rough chop it, and add it to my blender. This is a good recipe if your knife skills need a little work. There's a lot of chopping and slicing and dicing in this recipe. Next, I'm going to take my jalapeno. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a slice on the jalapeno just like this, making sure I avoid the seed sac in the middle. They say the seeds are the hottest part of the pepper, but that's actually not true. It's this inner membrane right here that's super, super spicy. So you can decide how much spice you want or how little spice you want by removing this membrane right here. I'm going to do this to the whole pepper, just cutting down the sides, making sure not to disturb that seed pack right in the middle. And then pigs don't like hot peppers, so I'm just going to discard this and put this in my compost bin. You are going to need 2 jalapenos, one for the salsa and one for the blender. So after I get my jalapenos, I'm just going to thinly slice them. This is called a julienne in French. Most cooking terminology is in French. That was the birthplace of food, so they say. And after I have my julienne tiny jalapeno peppers, I'm going to go back and just simply cut the other way until I have a nice, this cut is called brunoise, which means a very small dice. Now that I have my small dice jalapenos, I'm going to add that to the rest of the small dice. And again, this is for your watermelon salsa, which is going to be a garnish on top of the soup. I'm going to take my second jalapeno and I'm going to do a real rough chop on it. Again, avoiding the seed pack. I do want a little bit of heat in my soup to kind of balance out the soup. So I'm not going to take as much membrane out as I did on the pico de gallo. Just rough chop, and I'm going to add it to my blender just like this. Now, this beautiful cilantro. Make sure you de-stem the cilantro. Sometimes the stems can get a little woody in your mouth and they have a really bad, bitter mouthfeel and flavor. So make sure to just get the leaves. You can have young stems in here, which are the stems that the leaves are attached to, as long as they're really thin. So I'm going to take about half of this for my watermelon salsa, and I'm going to put the other half in my blender to make the soup. When you chop cilantro, you want to have your knife flat against the cutting board, and you're not going to pick the tip of your knife up. So you're going to take your non-dominant hand and lay it flat on the tip of your knife, and you're just going to rock it up and down just like this. See how the blade is not leaving the cutting board. All that's happening is that I'm picking up the back of the knife and I'm moving it along up and down. Now, you want to make sure your knife is sharp so you're not mushing the cilantro and you're actually chopping it. So I'm going to move it around a little bit more, and then I'm just going to do the same thing until it's a really fine chop. Cilantro is one of those things where you either love it or you hate it. Some people think it tastes like dish soap. I think it tastes really wonderful. But actually, when I was younger, I used to really hate cilantro, and then somehow I grew out of it, and now I love it. I can't live my life without it. So once you have that chopped cilantro, you're just going to put it on top of your pico de gallo mix. Pico de gallo is just chunky salsa. You'll hear me interchange those words while we're talking today. And then last but not least, we're going to take our watermelon. Now we already have the watermelon in the blender, so what we're going to do with this is we're going to do it the exact same way we did the cucumbers, where we're going to slice it very, very thinly, and then slice it again, and we want a really small dice of watermelon for our pico de gallo. Watermelon is very, very easy to cut, so watch your fingers as you're cutting it. And you kind of want a lot of watermelon. This watermelon, when it's in season, which is right now, is very, very sweet. If you don't get a sweet watermelon for some reason, you can adjust it a little bit with honey, but we'll talk about that later when we're blending the soup. So I'm going to take the rest of this and add it to my pico de gallo. Just making sure I kind of get uniform cuts. And make sure when you're cutting this, you get all those wonderful juices that land on your cutting board too. Those are going to help give everything really, really great flavor. Okay, maybe a couple more and we'll be finished with our pico de gallo. And one more big one. Here we go. All right. Feel free to snack as you're cutting. Watermelon is a summertime favorite. I love watermelon. So now we have our pico de gallo. I'm not even going to stir this yet. I'm just going to set it off to the side while we go and we blend our soup. So we have everything in the blender, and I've added a little bit of sea salt. I don't add too much sea salt because really the flavoring all happens at the end. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this moving in the blender, and then I'm going to slowly adjust the flavor for acidity and sweetness, and then I'm gonna slowly emulsify olive oil into the soup mixture, and it'll be kind of like the similar techniques that we did in the salad dressings back in the spring, the homemade salad dressings. So I'm gonna go ahead, and I'm not gonna add any of my vinegar or honey yet. The watermelon, I tasted it, it's really sweet. So I only want to adjust those flavors at the very end. So I'm going to turn on my blender and slowly emulsify the olive oil into it. You want to do this step very slowly because if your soup breaks, breaking means olive oil is separating from the base of the soup, which is mostly watermelon juice. Then it's not going to taste very good because you'll either get a big spoonful of oil or you get a big spoon of just unflavored watermelon juice. So you want to add the olive oil very, very slowly. I'm going to check the viscosity of the soup. The olive oil will also thicken the soup as you slowly add it. So it looks pretty good. I'm going to add a little bit more just because we had so many initial ingredients in there. And the total recipe will be on the website. So I'm going to add just a little bit more. And as you can see, the soup is a lot thicker than before we added the olive oil. You can see it's a really beautiful orange color, and all of the ingredients are really nicely mixed up. So now, this is the point where I'm going to check it for flavor. That's very good, but it needs a little bit more acid and a little bit more salt. So I'm going to add red wine vinegar. Raspberry vinegar is really good in this if you can find raspberry vinegar. Tarragon goes really well with this soup if you want to put fresh tarragon or tarragon vinegar in for a little bit of acidity. Once the olive oil is incorporated into the blender, you don't want to blend it on high speed because the more the blender heats up the inside of the soup, the more chances you have for it to break. So I have the blender on low while I add just a touch of acid to it. Now this watermelon is pretty sweet. Normally if it's not very sweet, I would add a little bit of honey to balance it out. I like honey better than sugar because sugar has this very strong bite to it and honey is a little bit more mellow. So I'm going to add a little bit more salt. And then I'm going to stop and taste it again and see where we are. Ooh, that vinegar really rounded out the flavor. Don't be scared to use vinegar. Vinegar is a flavor component that goes in almost everything. And if it's not vinegar, just acid in general, like lemon juice, lime juice. It really helps balance out all the food. So now this is finished, and we're going to come back over here. And the gazpacho base is finished. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour this really wonderful base into this bowl. And this soup will last. Make a big batch, eat it all week. You can freeze it, and it's wonderful. Now, that's the base of my gazpacho. I'm going to take the pico de gallo and I'm going to mix it up. And this is exactly what it's supposed to look like. It's supposed to look like tomato salsa pico de gallo. But instead of tomatoes, you use watermelon. And these are all the wonderful ingredients that are blended into the soup. So this gives the soup a really nice texture while you're eating it. I am going to add a little bit of salt to this as well, just to season it. And it's got all of the beautiful colors of summer. This is a very summer-heavy dish, something that will really wow guests, or even children love to eat this dish. And it's very, very simple to make. And all of these ingredients can be found at Hendrick House Farm or at your local farmer's market. All right. So once that's mixed up, I'm going to go ahead and give this a taste. You want to make sure to taste everything before you incorporate it together, just so that everything is nice and seasoned and balanced. Ooh, this watermelon is so sweet. All right. So this is it. These are all the ingredients, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it in the very middle of the soup as a garnish. The thicker your soup is, the more the pico de gallo will sit on top of your soup. I'm going to garnish it with a little bit of cilantro. And if you want to get super fancy, you can put a little bit of olive oil drizzle on the top. And voila! You have a very delicious summery soup. Thank you for joining us at the Urbana Park District Kitchen, and we'll see you guys in August.